The heat in Baghdad that day was unrelenting, the kind of heat that seemed to cling to your skin no matter how much water you consumed. My squad of 12 was on a normal patrol near the green zone. The city was a patchwork of bombed-out buildings, rubble-strewn streets, and intermittent signs of life. A child peeks from behind a curtain. An old man sweeps his stoop. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was the stillness before the storm. "Swivel your heads," I replied, scanning the buildings with my M4 at the ready. Intel claims that this sector has been hot in recent days. Hotter than the darn sun. Private Carter joked awkwardly, eliciting chuckles from a few of the guys. "Carter, stay sharp," Corporal Jenkins replied, his tone severe. "You're laughing now, but these streets devour novices for breakfast." It happened so quickly. We were going in formation for a split second. Eyes darted from window to alley in the next moment. A single gun boomed out, breaking the tense silence. Private Nelson fell to the ground. Blood was pooling beneath him before anyone could respond. "Sniper!" I yelled, immediately ducking behind a burned-out automobile. "Take shelter! Find the shooter!" Bullets began to rain down, bouncing off the concrete and flying through the air. My men ran for shelter, shouting over the chaos. "Where is he?" Jenkins cried, his voice increasing with panic. "Top floor! 3 pow!" Specialist Decker shouted, pointing to a partially destroyed structure. "Decker, get him out!" I ordered, laying down to extinguish the fire. Decker fired a burst at the sniper's perch, but the opponent was astute, using shadows and rubble as cover. Before we could readjust, the situation worsened. The first rocket-propelled grenade exploded with a thunderous roar, tearing up a wall to our left and launching chunks of concrete RPG. Someone screamed, although it was evident to everyone. "Get down!" I yelled, pushing Carter behind a pile of debris as another RPG smacked into a neighboring truck, causing it to explode. The heat burned my face, and the shockwave rattled my teeth. "Sergeant, they are flanking us!" Jenkins yelled out. His voice was scarcely audible between the gunfire and explosions. I looked around the corner and saw scores of militants spilling out of alleyways and doors. AK-47 is blasting. They were closing in, leveraging the confusion to their advantage. "We are pinned down!" Carter yelled, his face blanched with fright. "No, we are not!" I let out a growl. "We are Marines! Damn it! Hold the Q!" We responded with everything we had, but they kept coming. We dropped for every militant. It appeared that 3 more had taken their place. The RPG fire was unrelenting. Each explosion is a hammer blow to our resolve. When the militants became too near for comfort, I realized we had to act. We couldn't simply sit there and let them take us up. "Jenkins, cover me!" I shouted over the din as I slung my rifle over my shoulder and drew my knife. "Sarge, are you crazy?" Jenkins cried and fired fiercely at the approaching enemy. "Just keep them off of me!" I charged into the fray. My veins are throbbing with adrenaline. The first terrorist I faced slammed his gun at me like a club, but I dove beneath it and stabbed my dagger into his ribs. He gurgled and collapsed in a heap as I took the blade out. Another approached me with a machete, yelling in Arabic. I sidestepped his swing and slammed the buttstock of my stolen AK into his face, fracturing his nose before he could react. I swung my knife over his throat in a quick, vicious arc. The fighting became a haze. I discovered myself in an alley, surrounded by 3 militants. One lunged at me with a crowbar, but I blocked his strike with my rifle and slammed my knife into his chest. Another attempted to flank me, but I whirled around and shot him with my pistol. The third paused, his AK shaking in his grip. "Do not do it," I warned him. My voice is low and threatening. He ignored me and raised his firearm. I did not hesitate. He was down after 1 shot to the head. Back on Main Street, my crew was holding their ground. Jenkins and Decker had taken down the sniper, and the rest of the squad was mowing down the enemy with accuracy. When the militants realized they couldn't overrun us, they began to retreat, dragging their wounded and leaving their dead. "That's correct. Run!" Jenkins shouted and fired a couple final rounds. I limped back to my teammates. My body screamed with pain. That's when I discovered I had been struck 5 times. 2 rounds had been stopped by my vest, but one had ripped through my side, another through my thigh, and a graze had opened up my left arm. "Sergeant, you are bleeding," Carter exclaimed, his face paler. "I am fine." I lied while gritting my teeth. Just a scratch. By the time reinforcements came, the street had become a combat zone. The ground was littered with bodies. 35 hostile combatants are all dead. We had held the line, but the cost was high. 5 of my men had gone. Their bodies are lifeless, a sobering reminder of what we had paid. I dropped to the ground. The adrenaline is dissipating. Jenkins knelt alongside me and pressed his hands to my side to stop the bleeding. "You performed well, Sarge," he remarked, his voice heavy with emotion. "We all did," I said. "My vision is blurry." I awoke in a hospital 2 days later, hardly breathing. The physicians informed me that I had lost a kidney and most of my liver. My career was over, but I was present for our acts that day. I was awarded the Silver Star, but no decoration could wash away the shame of losing my troops. Their faces still haunt me to this day. A daily reminder of the cost of warfare. When I returned home, I believed I was ready to start anew. The environment felt different, albeit quieter and slower. The turmoil of Baghdad was past, but its shadow remained in my imagination. Home was meant to be my safe haven, a place where I could finally breathe, and in many respects it was. Maria met me at the airport with a smile that could brighten even the darkest night. She looked as stunning as the day I married her 10 years ago, and she continued to make my heart skip a beat. "I have missed you," she whispered as we hugged. "I missed you more," I said, clutching her close and feeling her warmth for the first time in months. She kissed me with tears in her eyes. "You're finally home. No more deployments, no more worries at night, no more worries." I assured her that readjusting to civilian life would be difficult, but I got a position as the head of security at a small company. It was hardly glamorous, but it was consistent labor. The regiment provided me something to concentrate on, something that will keep me grounded. Maria was also doing well in her career. She worked as a marketing consultant for an advertising business. Her clients were always impressed by the ideas she came up with. I was proud of her, but her work kept her occupied. Sometimes things get too busy. One evening after dinner, I decided it was time to have the conversation I had been putting off since I returned. Maria. I began sitting across from her at the kitchen table. When she heard my tone, she looked up from skimming through emails on her phone. "Yeah, I have been thinking. I'm not going abroad anymore. I'm here for good. Maybe it's time to consider about starting a family." She set down her phone. Her look is unreadable. "A family?" "Yeah." I spoke casually, despite the fact that my heart was hammering. "We've been married for 10 years. I know things have been stressful, but I believe we are ready." "I am ready." Maria leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Nathan? I do not know. I mean, this is a major decision. I understand." I spoke politely. "I am not saying it needs to happen tomorrow. I want us to think about it. We're not getting any younger, and I want to be the kind of parent who can run about with his kids without wheezing, like an old guy," which made her smile slightly, but it did not reach her eyes. "I'll think about it," she said, eventually standing up and taking up her plate. "But may we not hurry into this?" "Of course," I said, observing her flee to the sink. At first, I assumed everything was all right. Maria appeared normal. Work is usually busy, but that is natural. We continued to eat dinner together every night, laugh at old inside jokes, and sleep in the same bed. But in the weeks that followed, something shifted. She began arriving home later than normal, claiming that she had to remain late for meetings or meet with customers. She would sit on the couch, engrossed on her phone or laptop, even though we were scheduled to spend time together. Our conversations got shorter and more surface level. "Maria," I stated one evening as she sat at the dining table frantically typing on her laptop. Would you like to watch that movie? We talked about what? You know, the one with your favorite spy? She did not even look up. Nathan, I can't tonight. I've got a deadline tomorrow. You have been working late a lot, I said, attempting to preserve a pleasant tone. Is everything okay at work? Yeah, everything is fine, she responded instantly. Almost too fast. Just busy, that is all. I nodded, but her remarks did not sit well with me. All right, let me know if you require anything. Thank you, she said, finally looking up and giving me a tired grin. But the smile seemed far away. It felt like it wasn't meant for me. Maria was drifting away, and I felt it. I wasn't sure why, but the warmth that used to pervade our home was gradually being replaced by something colder. I told myself not to overthink it, that it might just be a hard patch, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. Once again, it was late. Maria walked inside the door immediately after 11. Her shoes clicked against the hardwood floor. I was sitting in the living room pretending to read a book, but I hadn't turned a page in about 20 minutes. Hey, I said, my voice even. Hey, she said, placing her purse on the kitchen counter. You're late again, I remarked, closing the book and setting it on the coffee table. Maria moaned and rubbed her temples. I told you, Nathan, there is a lot going on at work right now. Work, I murmured, my tone sharper than I had intended. And the weekly girls' nights, those are also part of the job schedule. She turned to face me, her eyes narrowed. What is that intended to mean? It signifies, as I mentioned, standing up. You are putting a lot more effort into anything else than into us. Maria tossed her hands in the air. Okay, here we go again. Do you understand how stressful it is to come home from a long day and be probed like this? Exhausting, I shot back. You are not the only one who is exhausted, Maria. Do you think it's simple for me to sit here every night wondering what happened to us? I'm wondering why you don't look at me the same way anymore. Her expression softened briefly before hardening again. Nathan, you are overthinking everything. I'm just busy. That is all it is. I stared at her, hoping to find something reassuring in her expression, but all I saw was a barrier I couldn't break past. Is there anything else, Maria? Is there something you are not telling me? What exactly are you talking about? She asked, her tone defensive. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I remarked, taking a step forward. If you're having an affair, tell me right away. Don't make me find out in another manner. Don't make me... Before I could finish, Maria grabbed the glass she had just poured water into and threw it at me. It slammed against the wall behind me. Shards are scattered across the floor. How dare you? She yelled, her voice trembling. How can you accuse me of something like that? Nathan, I'm your wife. I have been faithful to you every day of our marriage. So this is how you repay me? Then tell me what's happening, I yelled back. My own rage was boiling over. Tell me why you are so distant. Why are you shutting me out? If it isn't an affair, what the hell is it? Maria stood there, breathing heavily, her hands twisted into fists at her sides. Eventually, she shook her head. Her voice is calmer now, but no less angry. There is nothing going on, Nathan. Nothing. You want to know what bothers me? It is this. This continual questioning, this mistrust. You are suffocating me. I opened my lips to answer, but the words stayed in my throat. She did not wait for me to say anything. She turned and stormed into the bedroom. I stood there for a while, staring at the shattered glass on the floor. My heart was thumping, and my mind was racing with ideas I couldn't order. Finally, I followed her into the bedroom. She was already in bed. Her back was turned to me. I didn't say anything when I sat down next her. We lay there in quiet, the tension so strong it felt like there was a tangible presence in the room. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us reached out. We were just inches apart, yet it felt like miles. The air in our home had grown suffocating. Days stretched into weeks, but Maria and I's quiet remained eternal. We passed one other like strangers, exchanging nothing more than hollow hello and short remarks. It wasn't like our previous marriage. It was no longer a marriage. When Maria began going out twice a week instead of once, I couldn't stay silent. She returned home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers and wine that she didn't share with me. She walked through the door, the girls clicking on the floor. Another late one? I sat in the kitchen nursing a glass of water, I inquired, attempting to keep my voice steady. She stopped for a second before placing her purse on the counter. Yes, Nathan, another late night. We've gone over this. Now, the girls' night out happens only twice a week. I rose up and walked near her. That's quite a bit of catching up with the gals. Maria crossed her arms, her expression hardened. What's the point, Nathan? My point? I spoke, my voice rising. Is this getting out of hand? You spend more nights out than at home. Maria, this isn't normal, and you know it. I am not an idiot. Oh, here we are again, she laughed bitterly. You're accusing me of something, right? What is it this time? An affair. Lying. What? I took a step forward, my fists clenched at my sides. I'm suggesting that if you don't stop this, there will be consequences, severe repercussions. Her eyes flashed with rage, and for a second I thought she was going to throw something else. Instead, she moved forward, getting right into my face. You want to talk about the repercussions, Nathan? How about this? I will apply for divorce. Better. I'll inform the cops that you're abusive. Let's see how far your rules take you. Her comments struck me like a gut punch. I could feel the blood rushing to my brain, the heat of my rage about to boil over, but I bit down, clenching my jaw so hard it ached. I took a slow breath and stared her dead in the eyes. Maria, you need to mind your mouth. I spoke softly and steadily. I live by the rules. Respect for others and respect for oneself. I expect the same in return. You don't want to push me on this? She didn't respond. She scowled at me for a second before snatching her bag and shutting the door behind her. I stood there for a long time, tension building in my chest. I wasn't going to let her bring me down or destroy what little remained of our marriage without a fight. But I needed answers, real answers. That's when I took up the phone to call Jake. Jake was a private investigator I had known for many years. We had served together in the military, and I trusted him with my life, Jake. When he responded, I explained that I needed a favor. What is going on, Nate? He inquired, his voice rough yet concerned. It's Maria, I explained, running my hand over my hair. I want you to keep an eye on her for me. Something isn't right, and I can't just sit there waiting for the other shoe to drop. Jake remained silent for a time before speaking. Are you sure about this? I am sure, I replied strongly. Just do it, Jake. Please let me know what you find. Okay, he said with a groan. I will get started. I hung up the phone and sat back down at the table, staring at the empty glass. I hated that it had come to this, but I couldn't ignore the suspicion that Maria was concealing something. And if she was, I planned to find out. 3 days later, Jake called me as I was finishing up some papers at my desk. Seeing his name appear on my phone gave me a horrible feeling. I knew the news wouldn't be good. Jake, I replied, attempting to maintain a calm voice. What do you have for me? He paused before replying. Nate, I don't believe you'll like this. I clenched the phone more tightly. Please tell me. Maria has been hitting the clubs and bars as you suspected, he began with a cautious tone. She's not really sneaking about, but she is. Let's just say she doesn't behave like a married woman. What the hell does that mean? I barked. My pulse is quickening. Jake revealed that she dances with a different person virtually every week. It isn't explicit yet, but it's also not innocent. Lots of touching, some grinding. And he paused. Spit it out, Jake. There was also some heavy petting in the car afterward. As far as I can tell, there is no sex, but Nate is towing the edge. I felt my blood pressure rise as I pushed away from my desk, pacing the room, dancing with random guys and fooling about in cars. Jesus Christ, Jake. Anything else? Well, Jake continued, there's one individual I think you should know, named Brian. He works with Maria in her workplace. The name didn't sound familiar, but Jake's delivery hinted at this. Brian wasn't simply another coworker. Go on. Jake called Brian a real piece of work, married with 2 children and a reputation as a womanizer. He was transferred to your city from the Philadelphia office when a husband discovered he was sleeping with his wife. The guy is smooth, understands how to captivate women, and appears to be making advances on Maria. My jaw tensed when I stopped pacing and looked out the window. And Maria. How does she react to him? She does not appear to be shutting him off, Jake said. They've been seen together a couple times after work, but nothing official yet. If this condition persists, it has the potential to deteriorate rapidly. I took a long breath, attempting to calm the tempest forming within me. Keep an eye on her, Jake, I muttered with gritted teeth. If she breaches the line, I must know instantly. Jake said, Will do. And, Nate, I hate to say it, but you might want to consider your future actions, just in case. I nodded, but he could not see me. Please send me the phone number of a good divorce lawyer, I replied plainly. There was a brief quiet on the other end of the telephone. Are you sure about that? Jake eventually asked, getting in a car with another man. Jake? That marks the end of the line for my patients. Jake replied, I understand. I will email you contact information and keep you updated. I hung up and focused on the phone in my hand. The wrath simmered just beneath the surface, but more than that, I felt a crushing weight on my chest. This was not how I had envisioned my life, my marriage, but here I was, bracing for the worst. 3 days later, it was a calm evening. Maria had gone out for another girls' night. I was at home, nursing a cold drink and attempting to divert myself with an old Clint Eastwood movie. Even the crackle of gunshots on the TV couldn't drown out the 9 in my gut. Something was not right. An hour later, my phone vibrated on the coffee table, Jake's name displayed on the screen. I responded promptly. What up? Jake? Nate? Jake said with a hushed voice. We have a situation. I sat up upright. What kind of situation? Maria is in a car, he said, pausing for emphasis with Brian. Clothes are off! The words struck me like a gut punch. My hold on the phone intensified. Are you sure? I let out a growl. I'm staring at them, Jake stated flatly. It's quite obvious what's happening. What do you want me to do? I can rough him up, scare the crap out of him. Do you want me to just record this? My chest heaved as the wrath boiled over. Get the video and photographs I took. Leave them alone. She'll learn her lesson soon enough. Jake said, You got it. I hung up and threw the phone onto the couch. Pacing the living room, my hands clenched and my jaw tightened. Minutes felt like hours before the phone buzzed again. A message from Jake. I opened them, and there it was. Proof of Maria's disloyalty. Clear as day. My stomach churned. The lady I'd spent almost a decade of my life to, the one I'd bled and sacrificed for, was giving it all up for a jerk like Brian. I didn't crush the phone, even though I wanted to. I did not punch the wall. Instead, I grabbed it and phoned Kelly. Jake, the divorce lawyer, had recommended Nathan. Kelly responded smoothly. How may I help you tonight? I need you to begin the procedure. I spoke, my voice frigid and flat. What process? She asked carefully. Divorce? I spoke bluntly. I just sent you a video and a few photographs. That is all the proof you need. There was a pause. Nathan, are you certain about this? Kelly inquired, her voice softening. This is a major step. Do you truly want to end your marriage? I gave a harsh laugh. Kelly, my wife is in a car with another half-naked male. There is nothing left to save. I understand. She spoke sweetly. I'll get started with the paperwork. Is there anything specific you'd like to add or protect? I don't care about my assets, I replied strongly. She earns more than I do, and I know if she even tries to take my assets, she will lose big time. I sat down and stared at the phone in my palm. It wasn't just fury anymore. It was clarity. There was no turning back. The clock had passed midnight when I heard the automobile arrive. The engine idled for longer than necessary before shutting down. The sound of stumbling footsteps followed. Then followed the fumbling with the lock. She eventually managed to open the door. Her makeup was smudged and she smelled like cheap perfume mixed with liquor. I stood beside the entrance, arms crossed. Maria, sit down. I spoke, my voice steely and demanding. She swayed slightly and squinted at me. What is your problem, Nate? It is late. I am exhausted. Can we complete this tomorrow? No, I replied forcefully, pulling away a chair from the dinner table. Sit now. Her eyes rolled, but she agreed. I slumped into the chair, set a cup of coffee in front of her, and sat across the table, staring her down. Drink? I placed an order. She snorted and took a drink, grimacing. God, you are so theatrical. I leaned forward, my gaze locked on hers. I am aware of Brian. Her head snapped up, and a glimmer of panic appeared in her eyes. She hastily covered it with a scarf. What the hell are you talking about? Don't act dumb. I spoke in a quiet but frightening tone. I have video images. You are in a car with him, barely dressed. You're acting like a fool. Her face turned pale, but she refused to back down. That is not what it appears to be, she snapped, raising her voice. Are you snooping on me now? What type of husband would do that? I slammed my fist on the table, causing the coffee cup to rattle. Don't try to turn this around, Maria. I trusted you. So this is how you repay me? She stood abruptly and pointed a trembling finger at me. You are overreacting. It isn't like I slept with him. You were naked in the car with him. Was he giving you a flu shot in the buttocks or performing research? And how ridiculous cheating wives appear without clothes, I shot back. We were both aware of where we were headed, so don't dare to dispute it. Her face twisted in fury. You're unbelievable, Nathan. They are always attempting to dominate me, acting as if you own me. I got to my feet, looming above her. Control yourself, Maria. I have only ever respected and loved you, but respect is a two-way street. You've been driving the wrong way for months. Her hand flew out and struck me across the face. The smack stung, but it wasn't the pain that struck me. It was utter chutzpah. You'll shut up and listen to me, she yelled, her voice full of hatred. I will do anything I want, when I want, with whoever I want. And like a nice little husband, you'll stay at home and wait for me. Do you understand? Or do I need to hammer some wisdom into your thick head? Suddenly the doorbell rang. It's crisp, chimed, breaking through the uncomfortable calm that had settled over the house. My jaw clenched as I walked forward to respond. Maria following me like a shadow. I opened the door to see Brian standing there, the smug bastard, his grin huge as if he controlled the world, or believed he did. Hi, he spoke lightly. His tone was oozing with arrogance. His gaze shifted to Maria, skimming past me altogether. I felt as if I wasn't even present. I stood my ground, my hands tightening at my sides. He stepped forward. He was a couple of inches taller than me, but his height did not burn. It was his arrogance, without even a glance my way. He reached into his pocket and took out a small shred of fabric, a red lace panty. He held it up between his fingers like a prize before handing it to Maria. You forgot these? He spoke in a low, oily tone. I had a wonderful night. I felt blood rush to my head and my eyesight became blurred. His wrath fought its way inside me. I couldn't even look at Maria, who stood transfixed next to me, and then, as if he hadn't already crossed every boundary possible, Brian leaned in and kissed her directly in front of me. I raced over and delivered a flush blow to his jaw. I suppose no one taught any lessons about respect. When I mentioned he was out cold on the floor, Maria screamed. She then charged towards me and slapped me again. I pushed her back, and she fell backwards to the floor. I said that I don't strike ladies. But then there's Newton's third law of motion. Every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. Let me show you a demonstration, Maria. I stepped over to Brian and delivered 2 kicks to his groin while he was still unconscious. Now, Maria, you've hit me twice, and because the energy was not going to travel towards you, it flew toward him. Oh, the first punch was for his contempt towards me when he walked in. When she regained her composure, she turned back to me and exclaimed, "You son of a bitch! I am going to—" Then she slapped me again. I glanced to Brian, who was now waking up and groaning. I took up my boot and landed directly on his face. He was out again. You see, Maria, this will continue to happen. It's the law of nature. Maria then attempted to take up the flower vase and was about to punch me when she noticed I was holding a baseball bat and pointing it at Brian's forehead. The vase broke. So does his skull. You're called a bitch. Now. She calmed down and set the vase down. Then she looked for me by the phone on the table. I grabbed her hand and brought her across the kitchen to the chair, returning her to her previous seated position. Now, you disrespectful bitch. You'll keep your lips shut and listen, or I'll convert that entire skull into jelly and serve it to you. If you can understand the knot. She nodded. You should pay close attention and ensure that you comprehend. You are free to call the police and have me arrested. If you do, I'm probably going to jail. But when I am released, I will be a convicted felon. That implies I will lose my job. And with a felony conviction, I'll never obtain another good job. So guess what I will do? I'll come to find you and your boyfriend boy. And when I do, I'll be sent back to prison for an extended period of time. But neither you nor your lover boy will be at the courtroom to testify or see my conviction or sentencing. I'm going to bury you both, not if you understand what I mean. When she nodded, I gazed at her before asking in a low, flat, and quiet voice, "Do you believe I am bluffing?" Her fear-filled gaze fixed on mine. Her head moved sharply from right to left to right. That is good, because I wasn't. Not one word of it. After a moment, I replied, "Now you can respond to this question. Did you like having sex with that lover boy?" "I did nothing," she said. I played her the video, and everything was as clear as day. She started crying, "Assuming you won't have me arrested so you can keep breathing." "I hope you had a good time having sex with your boyfriend," I added quietly. "Now I'm going to tell you a few things, and you will listen quietly. First," I said, "there will be no more girls' nights out. These days are over. If I find out you tried it, I will be there. And you don't want that, right?" She shook her head swiftly and trembled. "Good." "Second," I said, straightening up, "I will file for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. We're finished. You will go your way, and I will go mine. I do not need anything from you, and you won't get anything from me. I keep my home and valuables. You keep your car and everything else you own. Do you understand?" Her lips quivered while she whispered, "Yes." "Good." I spoke, my gaze shifting to lover boy, who was still laying on the floor. "Now listen, bitch," I replied, refocusing my attention to her. Her head jerked up with alarm. "I'll take lover boy here for a short ride and drop him off at his residence." She sprang forward. She had desperation in her eyes. "Please, don't. He is married. His family will be devastated," she objected, her voice shaking. I smirked and shook my head at the irony. "He should have considered it while he was exchanging microbes with you. Now, while I am out, pack your belongings and get lost. I don't care where you sleep tonight or tomorrow night. It will not be in this home. Now, when I wake up, you will race to your bedroom and begin packing. Not if you understand." She nodded, and I stood up, looking at Brian as he began to grunt and wake up. He was still disoriented, trying to prop himself up with his elbows. The sight of him made my blood boil again without thinking. I stepped forward and kicked him squarely in the groin. His scream was shrill and guttural, yet it wasn't sufficient. "You believe you can get away with anything, don't you?" I mumbled, my voice low and angry. He did not respond, just gripped himself and whimpered like a coward. I raised my foot and landed another kick on the side of his skull. His body became limp. His eyes rolled back as he passed out once again. I looked at him for a moment, my chest heaving. My knuckles were still white from the adrenaline flowing through me. Then, without saying anything, I bent down and grabbed him under his arms. He was heavier than he appeared, but I was able to get him to his feet and bring him outside to my pickup. The night air was frigid, but it did not extinguish the fire in my veins. I flung Brian into the truck bed like he was nothing more than a bag of garbage. Jake had already emailed me the address, so I got into the driver's seat and drove straight there, gripping the wheel tightly the entire while. The streets were mostly vacant, with only myself and the sound of the engine. When I arrived in front of the house, I turned off the engine and stepped outside, leaving the door open behind me. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of a porch light. "Let me see how you explain this," I murmured under my breath as I yanked Brian's lifeless body from the back of the truck. He hit the earth with a dull thud and groaned slightly, but he was still unconscious. I pulled him up the sidewalk, my boots scuffed against the pavement, but I didn't mind. I deposited him just in front of the door, leaning down. I rang the doorbell once or twice. I stepped back and waited. The door creaked open, revealing a woman in the doorway. She appeared perplexed at first, but as soon as her gaze fell on Brian, her face distorted into pure fear. Her cry rang across the night, loud and harsh. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, her hands shooting to her lips. Brenda's scream echoed in the air as she glanced at her husband's crumpled body. Her hands twitched and covered her mouth. But I didn't let her be in shock for long. "Brenda," I remarked forcefully, stepping forward. "He has been having an affair with my wife." Her disbelieving eyes met mine. "What?" she whispered. Her voice cracked. I folded my arms and tried to maintain a steady tone despite the burning in my chest. "He even had the audacity to visit my house today." He handed her the red lace panty she had forgotten in his car. "That's how bold he's become." Brenda glanced at me, contemplating what I had just spoken. The concern on her face vanished in an instant, replaced by something darker and sharper. Her jaw clenched, and her hands balled into fists at her sides. He did it again. She snarled, her voice low and shaking with wrath. I raised my eyebrows again. She didn't respond directly. Her attention shifted back to Brian, who was unmoving on the ground. "That's her son." Before I could add another word, Brenda rushed herself at him. "You bastard! I forgiven you last time. So this is how you repay me?" she yelled, her voice breaking as she launched a violent kick into his groin. Brian gave a faint grunt. He still has 2 outs to defend himself. Brenda wasn't finished. She kicked him again, this time in the ribs, before aiming another at his skull. I struck her foot with a painful thud. "Brenda," I started, but she didn't listen. "Do you believe you can disgrace me?" she screamed. Her face twisted with wrath. Another kick struck, and I believe I could nearly feel it now. Brian had been kicked in the head and balls numerous times. I was beginning to feel terrible for the guy. Only a little. It was like watching someone try to squeeze every ounce of vitality out of a deflated punching bag. "Brenda." "That is enough," I said, stepping forward. She ignored me and delivered another kick, this time directly to his gut. Brian sighed and curled up slightly on the ground, but he was still not totally conscious. "Brenda." I spoke more firmly this time, grasping her arm and pushing her back. She was breathing rapidly, her chest heaving, but she did not protest. I stared her in the eye and firmly gripped her arm. "You have made your point. Call 911. I told her. Tell them he fell off the roof or something. Her eyebrows rose. Did you fall from the roof? Yeah. Unless you want to explain why your husband appears to have gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight champion, I replied dryly, looking down at Brian. She nodded, a look of understanding on her face. Brenda took her phone out and dialed. Hi. Yes, my hubby. He fell from the roof, she continued, her voice shaking but not wholly with worry as she spoke with the dispatcher. I stood there, watching. The night was silent save for Brenda's voice and Brian's occasional groans. When the medics arrived a few minutes later, I was leaning against my truck, arms crossed. I watched the mayhem develop around me while the medics worked on Brian. I leaned against my pickup, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. Brenda stood next to me, arms wrapped over herself, as if trying to keep from trembling apart. I broke the pause and added, "You don't seem surprised." She gave a sour laugh, curling her lips into a cynical smirk, because I am not. I looked at her, raising an eyebrow. Could you explain? Brenda sighed deeply. Her gaze remained fixated on Brian's crumpled figure. This is not the first time he has done this. Brian cheated on me a few years back, some woman in Philadelphia. I found out when the man she was married to confronted Brian. It caught my interest. What happened? She scoffed and shook her head. That man divorced his wife instantly, but Brian got off easy, at least for a while. The court ordered him to pay child support and alimony to her. He stuck with it for 2 months before disappearing. Just stopped paying completely. He was forced by the legal system to pay money to a cheater. The man did nothing wrong, but he was punished. He lost his children, his home, and his career. He had no choice but to disappear. I scowled, my jaw tensing. So, what happened with the woman? Brenda's expression clouded. She lost everything. Her house, her stability, and everything. She had 2 children. Nathan. 2 children used to live a comfortable life. They now do not even receive Christmas gifts. The words struck me hard. I looked at Brian, who was still groaning softly, as the medic put him onto a stretcher. It was impossible to picture someone like him unleashing such harm. But as Brenda talked, I understood how much worse he was than I had previously assumed. Brenda said, "She is still struggling out there." Her voice was lower now, laced with something I couldn't place. Regret. Guilt. And I stayed. I stayed because Brian paid the bills, and I didn't think I'd be able to survive without him. But suddenly her speech drifted off, and I could see the gears churning in her mind. I wrapped my arms tighter and nodded slowly. Now you've had enough. Brenda's eyes flickered to mine, keen and focused beyond description. Nathan, he's crossed the boundary. This time, I am done. She breathed shakily before returning her gaze to Brian as the medics carried him onto a stretcher. Her jaw hardened, and her hands clenched into fists again. I'm going to make him suffer, she added, her voice firm and cold. And when I'm finished, I'm going to divorce him and bleed his money dry. I apologize, I murmured, breaking the stillness. But at least you are aware of the situation. I had no idea I was married to a cheating bitch either. I shake my head. The venom in my voice was apparent. But when all is said and done, I'd rather know than remain in the dark. She scoffed, wiping away a tear in the corner of her eye. Do you think it feels better? Knowing. I shrugged. My voice softened somewhat. If it's any consolation, you didn't have to witness anything happen. I needed to see it right in front of me. He arrived to my home. Brenda handed her a red lace panty, as if it were a perverse trophy. Her lips form a tiny line. Her expression hardened again. Unbelievable. He is so audacious. I nodded. Just be sure he understands one thing, I remarked, jerking my thumb at Brian. The ramifications of this catastrophe are set in stone. If he doesn't stick to his tale about how he acquired those injuries from falling off the roof or whatever, you'll make him repent it. Brenda let out a bitter laugh and looked down at him. Oh, do not worry. He'll follow the story. He understands what will happen if he doesn't. She halted and glanced at me. Her voice was keen with inquiry. Do you have any proof of what occurred between them? Without saying anything, I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. A few taps later, I delivered it to her. The screen showed a video of Brian and Maria intertwined in the front seat of his automobile. Brenda's face twisted with loathing as she watched. What a jerk. She snarled, her fists whitening as she grasped my phone. Now, you have proof, I stated bluntly, taking my phone back. Use it. I'm not just doing it for myself. I'm doing it for everyone he screwed up. She looked at me for a minute, her expression unclear. Then I dug into my pocket again and took out a card. Here, I murmured, passing it to her. That's the number from my divorce attorney. She's good. You will need her. Brenda accepted the card, her fingers quivering slightly, and nodded. Thanks, she muttered. I turned and began going back to my pickup. The night air felt cool on my skin. I did not look back as I climbed in. I started the engine and drove back to my home. By the time I turned into the driveway, the adrenaline was starting to wear off. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, and took a big breath before going inside. It hit me as I sat in my calm abode. In one night, I had ended 2 marriages. It was an odd sensation. Satisfaction and tiredness are in equal measure. They both earned it. No question. Brian. He got the worst of it, and deservedly so. Maria. Perhaps she got off lightly because she was a woman and, well, I don't dislike ladies. That's simply not who I am. But suddenly a notion crossed my mind. Ridiculous and darkly humorous. What if I had Brenda beat her up instead? I grinned to myself at the foolishness of it, shook my head, and realized I needed a drink. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a glass. I poured a big amount of whiskey, the amber liquid reflecting the light, and took a long drink, letting it burn down just as I began to relax. The doorbell rang. I set the glass down, sighing. What happens now? I mumbled as I approached the door. When I opened it, there stood Jack, my old friend, with a bottle of Jack Daniels in one hand and a mischievous smile on his face. I just heard, he began, entering without waiting for an invitation. I heard you delivered some love to Brian tonight. I smirked and shut the door behind him. News travels quickly. I said this while motioning for him to sit. Jack laid the bottle on the table and sat down, staring at me expectantly. So, what happened? Don't hold back. I picked up my glass, took another sip, and leaned against the counter. Brian arrived up to my home. Maria had left a pair of panties in his car, so he was daring to drop them off. Jack's eyebrows rose. No way. Oh yes, I replied, shaking my head. I told Brenda everything. I brought Brian to her house, placed him on the threshold, and left her deal with him. Let us just say she did not hold back. Jack laughed, reclining back in his chair. Man, you are something else. Brenda now realizes she's married to a scumbag. She knows, I said, and she's prepared to bleed him dry during the divorce. Jack raised his glass, even though it was still empty. Here's to Brenda. It's about time someone put him in his place. I nodded and took another sip. Jack's laughter subsided and he gave me a knowing glance. So that means you and Marie are finished, I breathed gently, the weight of it sinking into my chest. Yes, I said. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning. Jack nodded seriously, then took the bottle of Jack Daniels and began pouring himself a drink. Well, he replied, raising his drink, here's to a fresh start. I clinked my glass on his, starting over. The following morning, I filed for divorce. By midday, Maria had been served at her mother's house. The ramifications did not take long to begin. Her parents phoned me repeatedly, asking with me to reconsider. They asked me to forgive Maria and get over this mistake. Even my own parents chipped in, asking me to think about it. It rapidly became evident that Maria had not told them the whole story. Perhaps she framed it as a misunderstanding or reduced the significance of her actions. That did not sit well with me. I called both sets of parents and said I might explain everything. However, there was one condition. Maria was not to accompany them. I made it plain that if she showed up, there would be no meeting. They reluctantly consented. When they came at my residence, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. Maria's mother appeared frightened. Her father was stiff and official, while my own parents had guarded looks. We all sat down in the living room, and I did not waste time. I phoned you because it appears Maria has been dishonest about what transpired. I began speaking in a forceful tone. So allow me to show you what I've been dealing with. I took out my phone and played the video. The one with Maria and Brian tangled in the front seat of his car. The room fell silent, except for the muffled audio from the recording. My mother's face flushed with fury. Maria's mom burst into tears. Her hands covered her face. Her father clenched his jaw but did not say anything until the video ended. My mom was the first to speak. Unbelievable. She spat and glared at Maria's parents. "And you had the audacity to call and ask my son to forgive this?" Maria's mother sobbed harder, unable to look at me. Her father, on the other hand, straightened up and tried to remain calm. "Nathan," he spoke carefully, "I understand you're hurt, but marriage is about forgiveness. Surely. After all these years, you still have it in your heart to give her another chance." Before I could respond, my father leaned in. His voice was cold and sharp. "Don't," he said, cutting off Maria's father. "Do not sit there and try to justify this. Your daughter humiliated my son in the worst way. He owes her nothing." Maria's father opened his mouth to argue but quickly shut it, realizing there was no point. I took a deep breath and looked at each of them. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But my mind is made up. I will never live with Maria again." 3 days later, Brenda Nathan called me. "I've received an update on Brian." I sat up taller, wondering what she had planned for me this time. "What's happening?" She stopped for a second before saying, "He's doing fine. He lost both of his balls." I was temporarily stunned. Damn. But that's karma. In addition to that, he has been crying continually. He has amnesia. Doesn't recall what happened to him. I told him he had fallen off the roof. He believes it. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. Amnesia? I suppose that's one way to deal with it. He is given a free license to forget everything. Brenda laughed, but it did not sound pleasant. "Yeah, the police closed the case. No questions were asked. Nathan, he's a mess, but I'll make sure he's properly stitched up once he heals. I will divorce him since he is impotent." I had to confess that the concept of Brian suffering in his own manner was strangely satisfying. I had no pity for the guy, but he wasn't going to get off lightly. "That's an excellent plan." I said. "Really? Rub salt into the wound." We both laughed. The tension between us has temporarily eased. "Well," I replied, reclining back in my chair, "I guess I'm glad everything is working out for you." "I wish you all the best, Brenda." "I'll make him suffer," she said. There was a tiny edge in her voice. "I will not allow him get away with this. He will learn." I smiled. I have no doubts. "Take care, Nathan," she added. "Also, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to call." "I will," I said. "Brenda, you should also take care of yourself." The divorce from Maria went well. There were no surprises, no squabbles over assets. Everything was separated cleanly. My side was secured, as was hers. I was free. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt able to breathe. A few weeks later, Maria called me. I was unsure what to anticipate, but I responded regardless. "Nathan." She began sounded almost remorseful. "I've been thinking a lot since my divorce." I kept mute as she spoke. I realize you probably don't comprehend. She proceeded. However, when you urged me to establish a family, I discovered something. I realized I wouldn't be able to have fun again. I'd be continuously worrying about the future and the responsible parties. So I chose to live independently for the following 6 months. I'm going to enjoy my life. And then I'll come back. I will be a faithful wife, the mother of your child, and everything will return to normal. I listened to her but did not say anything. Her comments lingered in the air, and all I could think of was how stupid everything sounded. Finally, she inquired, "Do you have anything to say about that?" I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to erupt, to tell her everything I'd been keeping hidden for months. But instead, I simply shrugged, not wanting to spend my energy. "Well," I replied, my voice calm but forceful. That was a poor idea. She remained silent for a time, as if the remarks had taken her off guard. I didn't care. This was the truth. I'm finished, Maria, and I will never be your fool again. Maria left town approximately a week after the divorce was finalized. She did not even look back, just packed and departed. As if I were no more than a chapter. She came to a close. I didn't feel anything, and it was just as I wanted it. A few months passed before I received the news. Brenda had divorced Brian. It was not merely the normal grounds. No, she went all in. She accused him of impotence, but she did not stop there. She also brought up the cheating claims, further tarnishing his reputation. I was surprised to learn that the judge was a feminist, a true man-hating type. For once, I was relieved that the court system had adopted a position that did not benefit the man. Brenda came out on top. She kept Brian's entire 401k assets and all he had worked for. I couldn't say I felt sorry for him. He received exactly what he deserved. Brenda was prepared for life. She wouldn't be struggling financially for a long time. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of her reaping the benefits of his sorrow. We remained in touch, but only for the occasional coffee. There was no romanticism or desire to renew things between us. She was doing well on her own, and so was I. What about me? Would I ever date again? Maybe. I was unsure. Right now, I wasn't thinking about it. There was a lot of processing and healing to be done. The thought of opening out to someone else seemed far away, nearly difficult. So, for the time being, I was only concerned with my own life. What little tranquility I had left, perhaps in a long time from now, but I didn't anticipate that happening anytime soon. Here's the next story. On Friday night. Just 3 days earlier, I arrived at Toby's Bar and Grill at 7:30 p.m. I was exhausted from spending the previous 2 days in the Big Apple finishing discussions with a huge multinational bank. When the day began, I was skeptical that we would ever achieve an agreement, but it appeared that the remaining impediments were falling like dominoes. By midday on Friday, only 2 issues remained unresolved. We decided to take a break and go out for lunch alone. I visited a local Jewish deli, ordered a sinfully enormous pastrami and Swiss on rye, and savored every bite. When we reconvened at 1:30, George Willis, the bank's lead negotiator, stated that we had made significant progress. I proposed that we split the difference on the final 2 points. George passed a paper across the meeting table, and I read what he was proposing. It was clearly not splitting the difference, but it was well within the range of what my partners and I would tolerate to win this major deal. I wrote my initials on the sheet, and George said he'd email me a formal contract by Monday. After shaking hands, we all left in different directions. I returned to my hotel, packed, and checked out. My fiancée, Trish, was gone for the weekend with her 2 elder sisters, so I pondered spending the night in the city. They were staying at one of Connecticut's largest Indian casinos. Instead of another night away from home, they planned to spend their days at the pool and spa and their evenings at the best bars and restaurants in town. I went to Grand Central Station and took the Metro North train to New Haven. By 7:30, I had drove up I-91 toward Hartford and exited the highway. I was driving through the always popular downtown West Hartford. I decided to stop for dinner. I was seated in Toby's bar area when I noticed my two future sisters-in-law slide onto a horseshoe-shaped table in the mirror. Their spouse slid in next them. The sudden knot in my stomach and ache that appeared to spread throughout my body warned me that my wedding, which was only 8 weeks away, was in jeopardy. My sister-in-law should have gone to the casino with Trish. After capturing the bartender's attention, I said to Michael that I needed to go outside for a while. I promise I'll be back. Not an issue. Chris, do you mind if I place your drink on the shelf and free up this space? Michael questioned, reaching for my glass. I nodded in agreement before leaving Toby's. I sat in my car at the rear of the parking lot and planned out what I needed to do. I called Trish, who answered. How are things doing in the big city, love? It's the same as usual. We finished a fruitful agreement, and I'm going out to supper. I wish you were with me. You're really sweet, Chris. I miss you, too. We had a great time all day. We lounged by the pool and sipped beverages. I have a good head start planning my wedding. Tan. I'll be meeting my sisters for dinner shortly. Trish and I talked for a little longer before exchanging I love you and hanging up the phone. I checked the Find My Phone app and entered Trish's information. I'm not sure where Trish was, but her phone was in Falmouth, Massachusetts, at the western end of Cape Cod. I assumed Nick Flaherty, Trish's longtime neighbor and friend, had a family house in Falmouth. We had been invited there several times while searching through my contact information. I discovered Sue Flaherty's cell phone number. I called, and when Sue answered, I said hello. Sue. It's Chris Harrington. Chris. Christopher Harrington. What a pleasant surprise. How are your wedding plans coming along? Nick and I are really excited to be there, I replied. To be honest, I am not sure how the plans are progressing. Sue giggled and commented, That's a typical male response. Hello, Sue. What are the possibilities that Nick will be traveling this weekend? Such a weird question. Nick rarely has to travel over the weekend, but he is away this weekend. What is this about? Sue inquired with some anxiety in her voice. Before I respond, let me ask whether you have a Find Your Phone app on your phone. Sue let out an involuntary SOB and whispered, Not again. A minute later, she resumed. He's meant to be in Philadelphia, but the tracker indicates he's at his family's cottage. I sighed and continued. I am sorry, Sue. Nick and Trish are together. Sue softly cried for a few minutes. This isn't the first time, she confessed. I'm going to phone the SOB and tell him not to come home. Can I ask you a favor, Sue? When she did not respond, I continued. Trish is not due home until Sunday afternoon. It's the same with Nick, she explained. I asked, Let's postpone our confrontation until tomorrow night. In the interim, I'm going to change the locks on my condominium door and withdraw half of the wedding money from a joint account. I'll be able to pack all of her clothes and other personal belongings and store the bags in the driveway. You're correct, Chris. I will do the same thing. If you need to speak with someone, please text or phone. I am sorry I had to call you. Sue was crying again, and between sobs she whispered, It is not your fault, Chris. My last call went to Billy Jones, a friend and neighbor. He answered, What up? Topher, I need some assistance. Billy, are you around tomorrow morning? I asked. My only plan is to sleep until noon, but Sally will wake me up at 7. What can I do for you? Is it possible for you to change the locks on my entrance door and the door that leads into the garage? And if you could change the code for the garage door opener, I would appreciate it. There was a moment of stillness before Billy spoke. Is the wedding called off? Unless I'm mistaken, Trish and I are no longer alive, I responded. You've got it, Topher. I'll go to Lowe's first thing in the morning and get everything replaced by late morning. Does it work? Yes, it does, Billy. Thanks. I feel 20 years older. I limped back into Toby's and proceeded towards the bar. As Michael handed me back my bourbon, I looked in the mirror and saw a reflection of my sisters-in-law and their husbands. Their appetizers were being cleared by the server. I grabbed a bar seat and took my drink to my future family's table, Michael called out. Chris, you cannot take the stool from the... Michael was cut short by my furious stare as I put the stool at the end of the table, climbed into the seat, and aggressively glanced back and forth between Julie and Karen. The environment immediately became frigid. Chris, please slip into the booth. Karen's husband, Steve, responded, I'll get you a menu. I responded without looking away from the woman. No thanks, Steve. I will not be staying long. I continued to stare silently at Julie and Karen until Julie's husband, Roy, inquired, What's going on? Chris's? Ask your wife, Roy, I responded. Roy and Steve turned towards their wives. Both women were obviously terrified. What's happening? Steve questioned the sisters. Karen was the first to speak, stating, It's not what you think, Chris. As I gazed across the table at Karen, the tension grew thicker. I'm guessing it's exactly how I think, I informed the group. Steve and Roy kept glancing back and forth between their wives at one end of the table and me at the other. When Karen began to cry, Steve demanded to know what was wrong. Chris? Your spouses are covering for Trish. They were all gathered in my kitchen last Tuesday because I was going out of town until Sunday. They were going to Foxwoods Casino for a getaway weekend. Where's Trish? Roy questioned the sisters when they remained mute. He turned to look at me. She's at Nick's Cape Cod home. Is this true? Steve hissed. Both women were crying by this moment. Karen nodded in agreement. Julia blubbery. Trish loves you, Chris. She actually does. Steve rolled his eyes and Roy stared at the table. She has an excellent way of expressing her affection. She and her sisters deceive me, and she leaves with an old neighborhood crush for a love fest weekend just 8 weeks before we marry. Your sister is a piece of junk. Don't you dare. Roy interrupted his wife and shouted, Shut up, Julie. He turned to me and asked, What are you going to do? I am going to cancel the wedding. Both pals leaned back into the booth. Their spouses sobbed much more. Dad has spent a lot of money on the wedding and reception, Karen explained. I do not care. I will not marry a woman who lies and cheats like Trish. I waited a few moments before informing the group. I told Sue Flaherty that Nick is cheating on Trish. We'd both want 24 hours before crushing them. When I requested Roy and Steve for assistance, 4 sets of eyes met mine. Can you make sure my head jerks towards their wives? Can you ensure that they do not call Trish until 6:15 p.m. tomorrow night? Both women began to argue before Steve responded, We certainly can, buddy. And then, turning to his wife, he remarked, I am disgusted with you. I'm curious if your sisters have ever covered for you while you cheated on me. Karen was surprised when Steve proceeded. If you are Julie, please contact Trish in any way. I'll consider filing for divorce. Roy's face was a brilliant crimson from fury. Julie let out a sorrowful groan as he replied, After the problems we had at the beginning of our 3rd year together, I might file for divorce either way, but understand. If you contact Trish, I will absolutely file. I shook both men's hands before leaving the eatery. Saturday was a hectic day. It took me several hours to erase the last trace of Trish from our home. Rather than piling the filled rubbish bags in the driveway, I rented a tiny storage container and borrowed my neighbor Billy's vehicle. It took only 3 trips to remove all of the bags from my property. The most challenging aspect of the day was sending an email to our wedding guests. I worked on the email in bits and parts all day. It read, Subject, Harrington and Clark Wedding Update. Dear pals, I am currently midway through a fantastic weekend, only 8 weeks before my wedding to Trish Clark. The weekend was fantastic because I discovered Trish had spent her time in another man's bed. Trish and her longtime neighbor, Nick Flaherty, lied to me and Nick's wife, Sue. With the assistance of Trish's sisters, Karen and Julie, and their deception, the couple is spending the weekend together in Cape Cod. You might be wondering why I think this terrible behavior is amazing. The reasoning is straightforward. I am not married to Trish. Canceling a wedding is considerably easier than going through the misery of divorce. This email is my official notification that I am canceling my wedding to Trish Clark. Hello, Christopher Harrington. I called Sue Flaherty at 5:30 on Saturday afternoon. We filled each other in on the duties that we were able to do because Sue was married. Her split from Nick would be significantly more difficult. She spoke with an attorney on Saturday morning and made an appointment for Monday a.m. The attorney had suggested canceling shared credit cards and, as much as possible, separating the family money. It was normal legal counsel in a divorce. We ended our call a few minutes before 6 p.m., and we agreed to text our husbands at exactly 6. My text simply said, "I hope you're having a good weekend with Nick. Thank you for proving to me and the world that you are a liar, a cheater, and an unfaithful lady. Our wedding has been canceled." I sent the text at precisely 6 p.m. A moment later, I sent the email to our family and visitors. 16 months later, I stood on the edge of the altar. My best man and groomsmen were flanking me on the left. The maid of honor and bridesmaids had made their way down the church's central aisle, each looking as gorgeous as the last. When I looked toward the back of the church, tears welled up in my eyes. Trisha's father stood proudly in his black tuxedo, his eyes, like myself and the rest of our guests, fixed on the most gorgeous bride ever. Her blonde hair was groomed and looked stunning beneath the little white veil. Her blue eyes gleamed with affection, and her luscious red lips reminded me of our future wedding night. The form-fitting white wedding gown accentuated her wonderful physique, while without making her look terrible. It was lovely as Mr. Clark and my bride walked down the aisle towards me. I felt a pair of eyes bore a hole through me. I examined the guests on my side of the church before looking across to the bride's side. That's when I noticed Trish. She had tears streaming down her cheeks. I watched her quietly remark, "I'm sorry." Before turning toward her father and youngest sister, she walked toward me. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.